Tech record. Great. Read my mind. Okay. Welcome on everybody. It's good to see you all here. It's great to see the different watch parties we have going on tonight. Um, Nice to see folks coordinating to join in person. Hopefully it'll make the discussion even richer. Um, and it's good to really be bringing folks out and bringing folks together around this. Welcome. My name is Niusha. I'm with the International League of People Struggle, the US country chapter. And I am joined by a wonderful host of facilitators who will be talking us through this discussion tonight. Um, the topic of today's webinar and discussion is called Defeat Trump's Fascist Agenda, How to Understand and Fight Fascism in the US. Wow, sorry, I'm getting distracted by how many people are rolling in. Um, so maybe if we could just switch to the next slide real quick. Um, just want to frame a little bit. Why are we here tonight? Why are we here? Why are we all joining on, and what are we hoping to accomplish? As folks are very aware, Trump has taken the presidency in the recent US elections. And as we know, the Republican Party are slated to take control of the majority of the US government. And we want to make very clear from the get-go that this party represents the most aggressive and most anti-people faction of the ruling class in this country. Um, and they've made it very clear from their track record and from their promises. After getting elected, Trump took no time to already be making calls for day one deportation, threats to attack migrants in our community, which he has only doubled down on since then. He has already made moves promising to stack his cabinet with billionaires and those who have proven from their own history of policies and actions that they are very capable of harming the interests of the people as a whole in the US and around the world, and they intend to continue to do so. Now, despite the very serious conditions that we're facing ahead of us, we know that Trump's rise to power doesn't come out of nowhere. It is not in a bubble, but actually comes amidst an already existing and current economic and political crisis that's largely advanced by the US and its own drive to maintain its hegemony in the world, maintain its capacity to exploit and oppress the world's people, all to line the pockets of the minority at the top who control the biggest corporations in the world, to advance its own military interests, to advance its own economic interests, right? And very understandably, many in our communities are feeling scared or uncertain right now. But what I want to emphasize from the start, and what's really the essence of why we're here tonight, is that many of us have already been taking up the fights to defend our communities, to address the very pressing issues that we are all facing when we are not only directly neglected by the US government, but directly attacked, right? Those who supposedly are saying that they serve us are in fact the ones responsible. And so when they have failed us, it is the people who have stepped up. And even more, as I hope will be clear by the end of this discussion, is that really we're trying to come to a clear understanding of the situation that's presenting itself to us, right? People have often heard the word fascism, and so we want to understand what exactly does that mean, but as the title makes clear, not only understand it, but we want to be ready to fight it, right? Having a clear and unified understanding of the system and how to make change is what allows us to be most successful. And really, we know that from history, the people have a lot of experience and lessons to draw from about what fascism really is, how it works, and how to fight it. And so we want to reap the gains of all of those lessons and bring them to the table today. Um, no matter how daunting things may look right now, we know that when we are organized and decisive and unified, the people have been able to stop fascism and will be able to do it again until we get to a situation where we've ended the very root of what produces fascism. So for tonight, just so y'all are aware, we're going to start off with the first portion of tonight being a bit of a webinar and discussion. Again, please keep dropping your chats and comments in the thread in the chat, and we'll keep an eye out for those and hopefully be able to address them. But the first part will be to come to that understanding, right? Level off on our analysis and viewpoint. But then a big part of tonight after the webinar is that we will be doing breakout discussions. Don't feel shy. If this is your first time coming to something like this, no worries. We want you to be able to participate in whatever way you can, but we hope that you stick around because the breakout discussion is where we will already be taking the lessons we learned in the first half and discuss together. How are we going to apply this? What are we going to do next? Because we're not here to just talk about things. We're here to plan to take action together. And so stick around, we'll intro it later. But for those of you who live in any of the major cities or areas, whether you're in person at a watch party right now or joining in online, we highly encourage you to join the breakout rooms in the region closest to where you live and where you work. And again, no worries if you're not in an organization. This is a good time to meet up and link up with other folks and figure out how you want to get plugged in. And learn together. And if you're not in any particular area, we also have a dedicated breakout and you're still welcome to participate in the discussion. So, so bring these questions, bring these comments, bring your own experience, and let's combine it with the lessons that we will talk about in the study today. So thank you all for joining. I'm very excited and privileged to be here with you all. Continue to introduce yourself in the chat. But for the time being, I will go ahead and pass it along to the first of our facilitators for tonight, Jasper from Anti-Imperialist Action.
Hey everyone, thanks Nusha for grounding us in the significance of studying fascism. I'm Jasper and I'll be walking us through what fascism actually is. But before that, so that we can have a solid and practical understanding of fascism, let's take a look at the conditions and the context in which fascism first arises throughout history. So throughout most of recent history, society has been divided up into different classes, right? There's people who have actually worked the land, waking up early and staying up late to produce different materials, products, provide services. And then there's those who actually profit off of people's labor, right? There's people working the fields, and then there's the landowners. There's the workers that are assembling the electronics that we're using right now, the people who mine the resources to make it, the ones packing it up and shipping it. And then there's the CEOs of these huge companies that are making billions off of the whole operation, where workers can barely afford what they're actually making. So we see that through these classes, the small minority of ruling elites is exploiting the vast majority of people who are actually doing the work. So we're putting in all this work and the profit is getting funneled up to these huge investment firms or giant landlords. But people understand that we don't have to be exploited forever. So throughout all of history, the working class has been fighting to change this. So different exploited classes have been trying to change this. So we see that throughout history, this class struggle is a constant. Anytime that there's been exploitation, there's been people trying to win their liberation. And the only way that these exploiting classes, these big landowners, big businessmen, have been able to actually maintain their position of being the exploiters is through maintaining a state that is able to help keep them in power. Essentially, we see that this state is an instrument of violence, where the class in power is going to push down on the other, and they're basically using violence to maintain their power. Right? Like who shows up to actually crush the strikes of workers fighting for decent wages and put people in a cell for taking to the streets? Who's going to slap charges on revolutionaries and freedom fighters, calling them terrorists or foreign agents and trying to lock them up? We see that the state is used to suppress any sort of disturbance to this ruling system. So this is primarily carried out through armed force, right? Military, police, legal system, where this ruling class is subjugating people who are trying to actually change the system, and it can even be used against people within the ruling class who have a different set of interests. So throughout societies before capitalism, a lot of the states resorted to extremely violent measures to maintain their rule, right? Crushing rebellions of enslaved people, violent wars of aggression where entire colonies were conquered, right? This mass violence against people was super widespread. And we can say through this, right, that a lot of states before capitalism were fascist. And then with the rise of capitalism, right, we see some democratic rights like voting rights, but still, even in these democracies, they're ruled by these big business owners or bourgeoisie who are thirsty for the resources and the labor of colonies, right? So they're still going to enact this really intense state violence and horrible treatment of people of the colonies that they've subjugated, people they've enslaved, and even counter revolutions against people that are trying to fight back. So eventually, right, we get to the age of imperialism, where these huge monopoly capitalists, think like Amazon or Tesla. This is a picture of like an Amazon factory, um, and they're basically controlling entire industries, right? Linking up with the banks and different investment firms, and they basically have control, unprecedented control over land, infrastructure, production, and finance. And the workers whose labor is actually making this operation run, they can still barely afford what they're actually producing. So these companies are just piling and piling up their wealth, and they're investing it all over the world so that they can get even more in return. And this just basically creates really destructive crises. Like think the Great Depression. Um, and with that comes even more class conflict, right? Even more colonial subjugation and even wars between these imperialists as they're trying to fight over more territories. So, under imperialism, we see that fascism really starts to become more prominent again because there's actual, like really strong movements of the working class. And we see that and these imperialist powers are also pushing for even more and more territories and land. So they're going to try and suppress a lot more people in the places that they're taking over. They're also going to go to war with each other, right? Which requires huge armies and a lot of repression in the different lands that they're invading. So I think top of everyone's mind when we mention fascism, right, is Germany. So about a century ago, the fascists like Hitler are going to take advantage of um, basically after World War I, the economic struggle or economic troubles and social unrest, and they're going to build up a following among people who are discontent with the economic crisis, and they start blaming it all on minority populations, right? And they're going to actually, start attacking the struggles of workers, of peasants, and then eventually they are able to win power in Germany, right? And they're going to take power on behalf of this big bourgeoisie class, these big business owners in Germany. And Germany is not the only country where this has happened, right? In so many other countries, the fascists took power and enacted really brutal torture against, the working class movement, and enacted, and backed the fascist state as it was conquering entire other territories and exterminated whole groups of people, and eventually engaged in a whole war between different imperialist powers. So basically the understanding of fascism that we have now, right, is that fascism is the tool of the ruling classes in imperialism, to use this open terrorist dictatorship to maintain their power. It's not like the baseline, right, in imperialism, but it's used in periods of worsening crisis or sharper struggle between classes. But really important to note, right, because we're thinking on a global scale, is that we see cases of these advanced capitalist countries becoming fascist, but that's only happened a few, still a lot of times, but it's not like a constant, right? But why is that? Imperialism has crisis like all the way down to its core, but the way that it's been able to survive for so long without like without outright fascism in the US, for example, is because it has ensured that fascism has existed in its colonies and in its semi-colonies. So, you can think of the arrests and attacks on revolutionaries in the Philippines, in Puerto Rico, right? The funding and training and military backing of entire fascist dictatorships to keep the partners of imperialism, right? These ruling classes in the semi-colonies that are linked up with the imperialists, keep them in power so that the continual plunder and financial parasitism that keeps imperialism afloat can continue. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is our definition, right? This, our understanding of fascism as, this open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital, right? This definition comes from the working class movements that were actually fighting fascism back in the 40s, right? So, we can kind of break this down a bit further. So we see that fascism is this, principle and practice of this small elite of big business owners or bourgeoisie wielding state power. We can think of the CEOs that we've seen in Trump's cabinet so far, right? And they're already saying how excited they are to actually strip away regulations and protections. We can see this, centralized political and economic authority that relies mainly on the unchecked use of armed force and coercion while disposing of different, like, the formal democratic processes, like, constitutional rights and stuff like that. You can think of like dictatorships that were rounding up activists without any justification, right? And the whole government and military being able to kill with impunity. No one's prosecuting them, no one's putting them in check for this. So all of this, being done with the goal of suppressing and exterminating its enemies, right? The working class who is fighting to end their exploitation. The different minority groups that they've labeled as the source of this economic crisis that's actually, their fault, right? And the people of countries that are resisting the imperialist aggression. Um, so, yeah, and not just activists, anyone accused of criticizing the government, right? So it's really this full scale, repression that's happening, like totally unchecked. And on this last point, right, on behalf of a superior nation or race, how many of us are familiar with the way that the U.S. will kind of project itself internationally, right, as the savior of democracy, or however they want to phrase it, where we see what they're doing with backing all of these dictatorships in their semi-colonies, right? That is like the opposite of democracy. They're actively funding and backing these most repressive dictatorships. So this is basically our definition of fascism, right? It's an attack on the working class, and it's this open terrorist dictatorship that is helping to maintain and upkeep this system of exploitation. So I'll pass it over to my comrade Sarah, who will walk us through a bit more of the details.
Thank you, Jasper. I'm Sarah, also with Anti-Imperialist Action at UMBC, in calling in from Baltimore. But now that we have sort of like a contextual understanding of fascism, now we're going to talk about like what the main features are. And these are like specific characteristics of fascism that we can see play out right in the open. So it's important for us to be able to identify these and analyze these so we can be clear about what we're facing, even if it tries to like present itself as something else, and so we know what to do to actually fight back. And so like Jasper was describing, fascism is like the emergency switch of capitalism, like that big red button when they push, when they're confronted with a crisis, so that the ruling class, like knowing that they can't rule any longer using traditional democratic processes. So instead, it'll rely on this open terrorist rule to survive a crisis. And this already looks like some of the ways that you all have been mentioning in the chat, like with the NYPD and Amazon warehouse workers who are currently on strike. Like the way that race and class relationships play out in the US today, this open terrorist rule is already being experienced by the most vulnerable people among us. So the big business owners, people who control labor, stand to gain the most from exploiting like these people. So working class Black communities who are facing like police terror and surveillance, or whether it's family separation and detention of migrants at the border, or labor exploitation happening in prisons, this open terrorist rule is already being faced by people in the US. And it's also being used to eliminate like any avenues to democratic participation or any opposition by people who stand to gain the most by changing their conditions. And the elite also know how much of a threat like that the working class pose to their power. So we'll also see the ways that like this anti-revolutionary rhetoric will be combined with taking advantage of like anti-people social trends of like racism or classism, misogyny, things like that. So they'll use terms like, quote, Black identity extremists, a designation that was actually used by the FBI in 2017, or something like wokeism to label anyone who's pushing for any sort of social diversity or societal change to these issues of like racism or classism as some part of, or like as part of some sort of like larger leftist coup. And so these two outlooks, this anti-revolutionary, anti-working class, and anti-people nature of fascism often comes like intertwined to help the ruling class like overcome this crisis and creating like a group of people and labeling them as its ultimate enemies, who are often, yeah, people who are advocating for change, like the working class, Black and brown people, women, all of the people who are face like hyper exploitation at the hands of the ruling class. And this like anti-people outlook also hides the class character of fascism. The fact that it's really like the big business elite, the corporate executives who have an interest in maintaining this rule, and hiding like where it is that the crisis of like unemployment or inflation is really coming from. So creating scapegoats that make it acceptable to oppress certain sections of people. And we'll also see another feature called like militarism or militarized bureaucracy. So under the present stage of democracy, we already see how police or the National Guard or other military entities are deployed as a response to situations where something like social services can be employed instead. But once this emergency switch of fascism has been flipped, then something called militarized bureaucracy takes this a step further, where actual military officials are put in charge of civilian institutions and are elected to help lead the government. So one example of this being General Michael Flynn, who was Trump's former national security advisor in his last administration, something that was actually like illegal to do. And that very clearly like starts to erode any guarantees of civilian protections. And under the current administration and their 2024 Republican platform, like we can already see how some of these other features like absolutism or propaganda or a fascist maintained mass space is already being played out. So, for example, we all know that Trump was a businessman before he was a politician, and he comes from a background of business elites. And this is reflected in his cabinet picks as well, the people who he's choosing to surround himself with, as Jasper was describing, to head the government, which includes corporate executives in like energy, finance, and investment, and automotive industries who all have like an interest in using the bureaucracy to carry out their class interests. And the 2024 Republican platform might have tried to present itself as like an alternative to like some sort of inefficient democratic government, but and it uses like this populist disguise to bring in people who are dissatisfied or unhappy with certain issues that ultimately result from a crisis of capitalism. So again, like unemployment or like inflation. And so political decisions like choosing to run JD Vance as Trump's vice president, who cast himself as, you know, just another member of the working class, shows how they'll attempt to reveal or how they will attempt to appeal to the US working and middle classes. But again, a closer look at their policy shows us like who it is that they're really interested in serving. And so the Republican Party cast Trump as this like absolute leader who will solve different sort of problems in society and quote like make America great again. But if we just take a look at what the taglines were in their platform, like we can really see you know what it means to like quote make America great again by attacking migrants, by carrying out mass militarization, of attacking like progressive education on like race or gender. And you know this sort of like rhetoric draws in what's known as like a fascist maintained mass space, a group of people who are like attracted by this like racist or classist, like misogynist rhetoric as a group that can carry out the bidding of the ruling class. And we saw like the consequences of this through the January 6th Capitol takeover back in 2021, which, you know, saw the participation of a lot of far-right groups like the Proud Boys. And they attempted to prevent Trump from leaving office by attacking some of the actual like checks and balances that exist in the government today. And sort of like a last example of what it is that we're up against is Project 2025, which a lot of people here might have already heard about, this really like shady plan that's being orchestrated by a conservative think tank and funded by a group of billionaires that's being implemented by Trump's team. And so this aims to get rid of states like checks and balances and trying to make the government like quote more efficient by cutting out bureaucracy. But this is actually paving the way for absolutism, like the absolute rule by one leader or small group. And so they've appointed like people like Elon Musk as heading the Department of Government Efficiency, which aims to restructure the federal government, propose cuts to programs, but this will just really make it easier for the government to escalate to carrying out open terrorist rule through some of the things that we already raised, like militarized bureaucracy, through this wielding this fascist mass base, through like expanding the presence of police to attack like any opposition to the eroding of civil rights and to quell any sort of resistance. Because, you know, I think it's very clear that people know like that our rights are under attack through throughout the next 4 years. And so, of course, there will be resistance. So it's important during this time to really like be clear about what the people's like true aspirations are and not to be confused by the sort of like propaganda or rhetoric that this administration might be pointing out. So to talk a little bit more about this, I'm gonna hand it off to the next speaker to walk us through like how it is that we fight back.
Okay, let's see. Okay, the room can't hear me, but can folks online hear me? Is this working?
Yes.
Yes, excellent. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, folks. We were just getting our tech setup arranged. My name is Daniel. I'm with the ILPS US Steering Committee, and here at the Seattle watch party with our very fancy owl camera tech setup. I would turn it towards the room, but I guess it's already trying to do that, so everyone can say hi. But hi, everybody. Yeah, happy to be here this evening, talking a little bit about fascism and what we can do to fight back. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the United Front, which is our tool, our weapon, to oppose basically all of the manifestations and the attacks on the people that Jasper and Sarah and Nisha were just describing. So yeah, with that, let's get into it. What is a united front? It's ultimately, right, it's about a way of bringing people together around a common action and goal. So in this particular case, right, we're bringing people together against fascism, but it could be against or toward other political purposes. And ultimately, right, it's a weapon. It's a weapon to establish unity of action against this narrow target. So if the United Front is about taking action together, it's less of a formal coalition. It doesn't have to be structured per se. It's more like building a movement, right? Building people up to have the consciousness and the will and ultimately the action, the unity and action against the target in a lot of different ways. And so with the anti-fascist United Front, because fascism is such a severe, brazen attack against the people, we need to unite with everybody that can be united with in order to fight back and oppose fascism, right? So this is basically the vast majority of society has an interest in fighting back against fascism across all different kinds of sectors and classes, right? You know, from farmers, students, teachers, doctors, construction workers, right? All these people can come together and fight back against fascism. And you know, this is not a new concept. This is you know, an action that people have been taking for a long time. On the right side, there's a flyer from the Black Panther Party actually convening a conference to build a united front against fascism. So this is a well-known and you know, hopefully a better known tactic to fight back against fascism that we were hoping to explore today and arm ourselves with the tools that we need to defend and oppose Trump. You know, while our focus today is around the anti-fascist United Front, that's obviously not the only kind of United Front there is. The ILPS, the International League of People's Struggle, we are, for instance, building out a global anti-imperialist United Front, right? Because we recognize that imperialism, which is this global profit-driven system, is also even at the root of rising fascism and the main source of misery for people around the world. And so our anti-imperialist United Front that we're building out along with many other people around the world is part of the broader anti-fascist United Front, but it goes one step further, right? Yes, we have to fight fascism, but we're not done there. And so I think we'll wrap up this presentation coming back to this point as well. Also, for the record, I'm probably going to say United Front a lot, so I might start using the term UF, which just means United Front, just in case folks are curious. So now that we have a little bit of overall what is a anti-fascist United Front, we can break it down a little bit of who is it for and who's it against, right? This one's kind of an easy one. What does the anti-fascist United Front oppose? It's in the name. It is fascism, indeed, right? That is the target that defines the United Front, right? It is the action that people are taking against this particular target, right? So in this moment, as we're gearing up, we're preparing to fight back against Trump and the big business interests that he represents, right? But the other part of it, who can the Anti-Fascist United Front include is maybe a little bit more complex. So we, yeah, right? We said a little bit earlier, it's anybody with a material interest in opposing fascism, anybody that is kind of, yeah, faces these attacks, right? And so because the goal of the United Front is to oppose fascism, people will have all different kinds of reasons for doing so. And they're going to have different visions for the future. And so part of the trick with building out the Anti-Fascist United Front is that you don't have to have the same vision of the future to be part of that United Front. The main thing that's important to be part of it is to take action against fascism in this case, right? So some people are going to want socialism. They want a new system, right? One that doesn't depend on the exploitation of workers. Some people are not thinking about that yet, right? They just want to put an end to the fascism, right? These people are coming together because right now the most pressing issue is the need to defend each other, defend our communities, and fight back against the extreme attacks on the people. And so that strategy has broader implications, right? Because it means that we're bringing together people from all different walks of life, all across society, because they're affected, right? So that means our Anti-Fascist United Front can include Kamala Harris voters, right? It can include people that voted for socialism. It can be even Trump voters, right, can be brought in because ultimately the impacts of fascism will not favor them, right? Even if they believe Trump's words about how he's going to build a better future for them, we know that that's not true, and we just have to show people that, right? So yeah, not everyone is going to be equally invested in building this United Front, but the point is that they can and should be engaged to build it out, to build it as broadly as possible, to bring in the most people and to make it strong and solid, right? And so what that means for us is that we need to be making more connections, expanding our networks, working with people that we might not be so used to working with in order to, yeah, oppose this real serious danger to our people. So, you know, even though we want the United Front to be really big, right, bringing a lot of people, we also want to ensure that it still stays strong, right? How do we ensure that the Anti-Fascist United Front has the right direction, right? It doesn't get co-opted or misdirected. And so one of the key lessons from history, from the practice of building out these Anti-Fascist United Fronts, is that the core of it really needs to be led by workers, right? The working class needs to help lead and guide this United Front. We want this UF ultimately to advantage and empower the working class, because that's also ultimately going to benefit the people broadly, right? We already heard about how fascism is primarily an attack on workers. And so in building out the United Front against it, their interests also need to be at the core, right? And they have the most at stake, which means they're might be the most reliable in times of crisis, right? Historically, workers have come out and fought back when workers' rights are under attack. And right, workers are also really powerful when they come together. They can provide the United Front with teeth, right? When they go on strike, shutting production down, right? These are real serious weapons that we should be able to harness as part of our anti-fascist UF in order to yeah, fight back against this system. And so ultimately, what does that mean that they're at the core of the UF? You know, like how do we actually build that out? It means, right, the political direction needs to be aligned with the interests of the workers. The workers can be relied on to provide leadership and advance the power of the mass movement. And it also means that we should be consciously bringing in and organizing more workers into this UF to build out its fighting strength. And so as we build up against Trump, right, we should all be thinking about how to link up with workers across like our different areas, our communities where we're organizing or where we live, or are ourselves working in order to help bring them into this UF. So that's kind of some of the theory behind the how to build out a united front, what the components of a anti-fascist UF are. And so for a tangible example, right, we have South Korea. So for those that have been tracking the news in South Korea, now we can kind of understand the action that people took more in terms of, right, how to build out the anti-fascist UF. So yeah, to recap, Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law in South Korea, right, following kind of many, decades really of resistance against fascism and far right leadership in South Korea. In opposition, people formed the anti-fascist United Front against him. Legislators voted to nullify the martial law and ultimately impeached him. But of course, the power ultimately came from the people, right? And the workers at the core. We'll see it again, right? Thousands of people took to the streets. They were safeguarding, sort of blocking off the legislature in order to kind of allow them to engage in the process there, right? The mass movement was there to empower justice, right? But then the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, which is the largest progressive union in South Korea, which represents over 1 million workers, called for an indefinite strike, general strike, until Yoon Suk-yeol resigned, right? So this had immense power and impact on the South Korean economy and was one of the major factors in forcing him to be impeached ultimately. And this is an example of building out the anti-fascist UF within South Korea, right? But it had international components to it as well, right? Even folks, on this webinar were part of the United Front against him. People took action in many different ways. Here in Seattle, there was a group called the Evergreen Coalition that launched protests locally, right? Primarily of South Koreans, but a large community was able to give support and solidarity in many different ways, whether it's showing up to the rally or talking with friends, statements online, things like that. We're lending power to this united front, right? So now that we have kind of an example behind our belt, we're going to kind of go back a little bit to more of the breakdown on sort of the bigger picture of like what's the strategy of the anti-fascist UF overall, and then we'll break down some of the tactics too. So kind of like the specific methods that it's actually being carried out. So within the anti-fascist UF, right, the main strategy, as we've kind of laid out already, is to isolate and defeat fascism. And that primarily comes through the building up the power of the people. So, for example, against Israel, right? There is an international movement to boycott, divest, and sanction, right? To reject normalization of Israel. All of these are moves that seek to make Israel a known enemy of the people, right? And it's not just about Netanyahu or whoever's president, but it's about the state itself, right? Helping to define it as fascist so that it can be isolated as an enemy of the people. There's also, right, so there's like the isolation component, and then there's the defeat, right? There is the Palestinian resistance that seeks to defeat fascism by bringing an end to the ethno-state, right? In the Philippines, for example, here's a photo on the left of people power in the 1980s when millions of people rose up against the dictator Ferdinand Marcos, which ultimately led to his ouster, right? So we're seeing kind of these tactics to isolate and defeat. And through these examples, it's clear that the anti-fascist United Front is not a defensive, strategy, right? It is offensive in nature. Of course, there will be defensive measures that people need to take in building it out, right? We are already anticipating needing to increase our ability to defend migrants, to defend attacks on women, LGBTQ people, all of the people that are marginalized and especially prone to attacks on the people under fascism and under Trump. We're going to be hosting like know your rights trainings, those kinds of things, right? But even with some of those defensive measures overall, right, we need to go on the offensive. We can't just be defending, we need to fight back. And so, yeah, I guess another point on the strategy is that if we go back to the definition, right, the United Front is all about the action that we're taking together, right, in a united way. But it's through that action that we also build up our political unity. We come to understand who like our enemy is, who are the people that we can rely on and trust, who are our friends, right, politically in this situation. And ultimately also the system that's behind it, right? And what's needed to change, right? So, people taking action against Trump might not know that they're part of an anti-fascist united front. They might not even be conscious about fighting fascism itself, right? But educating people on the truth, bringing them into organizations to work together, right? To take to the streets, testing our abilities to fight together. These are all essential components of building out and sustaining the fight and growing a movement against fascism. For a new system. So yeah, that was kind of big picture. Now a little bit more specifically, right? Like what is the anti-fascist UF look like kind of on the ground, right? There are a number of different ways that people have been and are taking action against fascism as part of a united front, right? There's propaganda and education. People are passing out flyers. They're making Instagram posts on social media. They're talking to their coworkers, right? These are all different ways that we can expose and isolate the target and elevate consciousness, right? Advocacy tools, right? These are part of the mass movement if they're wielded effectively, right? It is important to link up and basically fight this struggle on all fronts that we can. So, there might be legislative measures that can be taken as part of the struggle, but it's important that it remains rooted in the power of the people and under the kind of direction to serve the interests of the working people, right? Mass mobilization, another tactic crucial in building out the UF, helping to set a narrative against a target, right? To show united, broad, widespread opposition, a venue for people to come together, exchange their ideas, right? Practice the collective struggle. Strikes, we talked about that before, right? Halting the machinery of capitalism, the machinery of fascism too, right? In order to, ultimately strike a blow against fascism. And then armed struggle as well, right? National liberation struggles, national liberation armies fighting for sovereignty and freedom from foreign domination and fascism are a component, are one example of the ways that people are taking up the struggle against fascism around the world. I think most critical for us too is that the fight against fascism really happens at the local level, especially, right? It's important that we identify the local manifestations, the local targets of fascism to, understand how is it that attacks on workers are playing out in our communities. And then from there, bringing people together and linking to the bigger fight, right? So, I think hopefully folks can get a chance to discuss that a little bit in some of the breakout groups soon. I'm going to pass it from there to Cody, I believe, who's going to share a little bit of a recap and an outro, and then we'll move into the discussion slides.
Thank you, Daniel. Hi there, friends. Can you hear me okay? I'm just checking. Folks on our screen hear us?
Yes.
Is there a thumbs up? Nice, thank you. Just want to check if our sound was working for our watch party here. Hello, everyone. My name is Cody. Based here in Portland, Oregon right now. I'm a member of the National Steering Committee with ILPS US. I'm also a member of the Global Secretariat with the International Coordinating Committee of ILPS. And because I have the honor of getting to work with all of our ILPS members all around the world, I get to see how this is not just a US phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon. Everywhere, IOPS members in every country are gearing up for this fight against fascism. What's coming home to us right now in the form of this crybaby wannabe dictator is what has been happening all over the world for so many years, for decades. If anything, it's worse in other parts of the world. But what can't be ignored is the fact that because this is such a linked struggle that we have, we're in this fight together. Because we are all being impacted by fascism, it means that this anti-fascist united front is truly a global phenomenon. And we're seeing that more than ever right now. And what I think is the most important message that I'm taking away from this webinar that we've done here is that really the anti-fascist united front, when we're talking about a united front, it really has to be everyone. Everyone who is impacted by fascism, which is everyone except for the 0.0001% has to be in, because that's the way we're going to fight back. What else I take away from this is that we all might have different ideas of like long term, what kind of vision that we have for the world we want to see. And those might not always be the same long-term vision, but we have to focus on the short-term vision right now because the fascists want to kill us. I'm not going to cut any corners. The fascists want to kill us. They already are killing us. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this webinar right now who know someone, at least have had some degree of relationship, know of someone who has been martyred by fascism. The fascists want to kill us, and we cannot get caught up in arguing about what our differences are. We have to come together on what we can agree on, and we have to push forward, and we can, because this united front is not just some abstract thing. I think that's really what I got out of what Daniel and Sarah and Jasper was saying, is that, you know, this is a historical process we're in, and it's going to be a historic unity for us to build to get through it. It doesn't mean that you can't disagree on things either while we're fighting together. I know everyone here, if you have an opinion, then you clearly have an idea about what kind of long-term world you're looking to build. We have it in ILPS. In ILPS, we have a very specific perspective on where fascism comes from. To us, to our understanding, fascism comes from imperialism. It's inherent to imperialism. And imperialism is inherent to monopoly capitalism. So this kind of system that we're up against now that Trump is bringing here, the seeds were set for this system under Biden, just as they were under Clinton, under Reagan, even under FDR, President Roosevelt. It's not about the person, it's about the system. And so for us in ILPS, that's why we have this perspective about building a united front, is because if we're all in this about changing a system, you can't just do that with a small group of people. It's the entire society that has to do it together. It's everyone in the country mobilizing. It's the masses of people who are overthrowing fascism and imperialism in each of their countries that are actually bringing about liberation. And it's our international solidarity of doing that together, arm in arm, that is actually going to have us weather this fight. So again, The fascists are trying to kill us. We have to unite. Let's debate whatever we can, as long as it gets us more on the same page for the fight right now, and maybe gets us to understand a little bit more about what the longer term fight is that we got to wage after we kick out the fascists. You know, right here in Portland, when the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer come out to show off, they might not be agents of the state directly. And maybe the cops are actually coming out to ruffle them up. But we know that just because the state seems to be going against them, they're still doing the interests of the fascists in control of the state. The Zionist settlers who are leading literal lynch mobs through Palestinian communities, they might not be directly members of the Israeli state, but we know that they're actually carrying out the interests of the state. That term that Sarah used earlier, open terrorist rule, we have to consider that. Fascism is an open terrorist rule. And everyone who is actually willingly becoming a fascist foot soldier and doing the will of this state is doing so because they think they're waging some kind of revolution. That is why we have to bring people together to show that the real revolutionary thing we can do is to build this united front. We can win. We have to win, and we will win. So let's focus on winning this fight together, because it's only by fighting together that we win together. So to get ready for J20 and all the years beyond, let's really hold this tight. And I'm hoping now, as we go into our breakout groups, whether you're online and you're about to jump into a breakout room, or you're physically in a watch party. By the way, there are some physical watch parties happening now, and we will be tuning into our city watch parties that you'll see on the screen. So if you are not in a physical watch party somewhere, you might be able to tune into one happening in your area. But before we do that, wanted to thank everyone again so much for coming on here. For all of our ILPS members, let's keep building and expanding the league. If you're not part of an ILPS organization, if you want to join ILPS, then you can visit our website, ilps.us, and find a way to do that. This QR code on our screen will take you there. There's some resources you can find. For what you'll see on the screen is our Defend People Struggle primer that talks about state counterinsurgency and how it fits into the imperialist system and how we can build the movement to fight back. This primer is specifically about Biden's counterinsurgency program. We know it's built off of everything that came before him, and Trump is just going to keep it going. So it's still very relevant today. So we hope that you can download this and maybe even lead study groups of it in your local organizations. We'll also be sending out these materials. We'll be sending out the slideshow, links to this recording on YouTube. There is a primer that we use to build up most of the content in here by the People's Resource for International Solidarity and Mass Mobilization, or PRISM, called Fascism as a Tool of Imperialism. So look out for that. That'll come out too. And again, let's unite, let's fight, let's win. So with that, got fists raised up here in the Portland Watch Party. With that, we're going to move now into our discussions. There's going to be some regional breakouts that are coming up on the screen, I think, soon. And again, go to the one that you feel like is the region you're most connected to. There will be a general breakout also for anyone that doesn't feel as tied to a specific region. You can just stay in here, and there will be a general breakout facilitation. And the discussions, we hope the discussions can kind of, take a life of their own, but we did want to start with some of these main questions to frame it. So the main questions that maybe we can start with is what impacts of the Trump administration and Project 2025, if you're familiar with what was said about it earlier, are you anticipating locally the impacts of Trump's fascist agenda locally? What is that looking like, and how are we getting ready to fight against it? How are we building up the anti-fascist united front in our localities, in our communities where we live, and how are we drawing in as many people as we can to fight and win. So let's start the conversation there. I believe now we will move into the breakouts. I think you'll start to see on your screen an option to do breakouts if I'm correct. Yes, so we have breakout rooms down below. In your menu, there's a little 3 dots, and you'll see an option for breakout room. So jump in, and this will be the end of the overall webinar. So we'll see you in the breakout rooms. We'll see you in the streets. We'll see you in the fight from now until long after Trump is defeated. All power to all the people. Long live international solidarity. Let's have a discussion.